Hi, guys, and happy Thursday. Welcome back to another episode of the Get Your Popcorn podcast. I'm enjoying a bit of a zero sugar cola. I've officially made the swap from Diet Coke and Diet Pepsi in order to support Canadian. This is Western Family. It is from Vancouver, so there you go, supporting local for me. Yeah, it's been quite the week in politics, hasn't it been? Not gonna say anything too much on that other than we have a new prime minister here in Canada who seems to be showing some good promise, heading over to Europe and then none of it in order to build it and strengthen relationships there, which is excellent. And any conservatives listening, yes, we did vote him in. If you were the member of the Liberal Party, we all got to vote. As a member of the Liberal Party, I voted for him. So yeah, there was a vote. And may I suggest that you do a little bit of research on how our political system works. Anyway, so again, if you're Canadian, support Canadian brands. Make sure you're buying as local as you can. Make sure we're not buying stuff from the US where you can. Vote, 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 essentially with your wallet. Do what you can. Never the 51st state. So today we're doing Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I'm really excited about this one. This for a long time was in my top 4 movies when I did Letterboxd. Like initially that was number 4. I think it's dropped down to number 5 after seeing Anora and having that move to the top spot. I don't know if you guys can see if you're watching this on video. I have added hair tinsel in because I was very inspired by Anora's hair. I've got pink. I'm doing an upcoming bodybuilding show. I do that as well with all my free time, amongst other things, and being a mom. But yeah, so I'm gonna get some silver stuff. I'm just hoping it doesn't look like gray on stage, but I am getting grays now. That's been distressing, and my whole bangs have gone white. I have touched up my roots since last episode. If anyone is wondering why I no longer look like I have bald patches, it's because I touched up my roots. I couldn't get it together enough to wear makeup for you guys today, but like we're all friends here, and I like sitting behind the scenes anyway. It's not like I'm an actress, so I think it's fine if I'm not the most attractive when on film. Also, I was looking into it about the Vancouver Film Festival that'll be coming up in the fall. I think I'm gonna go, so let me know, you guys, if there's anything sort of closer to that's coming up that you want me to see or that I should go and do, or if you guys have been to the Vancouver Film Festival, if you can let me know what it's like. Yeah, it's just a thing that I'm thinking about doing. Anyway, I digress. Let's get back to the film at hand. We're doing Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This is a 2019 film from Quentin Tarantino. It was the last film he did. We're still waiting for his next and apparently final project of the film. This stars Leonardo DiCaprio, Brad Pitt, and Margot Robbie. So we'll do a little bit of a background. If you haven't seen the film, it's like a historical reimagining, much like Django and Inglourious Basterds. This is a lot more like real life characters in it. Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth, the main 2 characters, are fictional, but everybody else they interact with for the most part are people who existed in real life. So that's the premise of the film. It obviously doesn't end like it did in real life, much like Inglourious Basterds. But yeah, I think this is Tarantino's best work. It's my favorite of his films for sure. So that was first written as a novel over 5 years until during the filming of Death Proof. Quentin Tarantino was speaking with Kurt Russell and his longtime stuntman, and it was sort of the last film they worked on together, and it kind of sparked the idea for the dynamic between the 2 characters. After Quentin Tarantino finalized the script, he was the only one to hold a copy, and he lent it to Brad Pitt, Margot Robbie, and DiCaprio, and they were the only ones to read it before production started. This is the first Tarantino film that wasn't produced by the Weinstein Company and Miramax. Sony got the distribution rights in exchange for allowing Quentin Tarantino to have absolutely complete control and final cut on the film. For the casting of the film, like I said, Brad Pitt is Cliff Booth. He plays the stuntman for Leonardo DiCaprio's Rick Dalton. Tom Cruise was first considered for the role, but it ended up going to Brad Pitt. DiCaprio, I think, was always in mind for Rick Dalton. Margot Robbie plays real-life actress Sharon Tate. Sharon Tate was tragically murdered by the Manson family. And then we have the Manson family members. It's pretty crazy, the supporting cast of this film, the Manson family. A lot of these people were cast as complete kind of unknowns and have gone on to completely blow up. We have Mikey Madison, Sydney Sweeney, Austin Butler, who plays Tex Watson. We've got Margaret Qualley, who plays Pussycat. Dakota Fanning, although not unknown, is also in the supporting cast. She plays Squeaky Fromm, who's a member of the Manson family and actually attempted to assassinate President Gerald Ford in the 70s. Initially, Tarantino wanted Jennifer Lawrence to play this part, but I believe it was scheduling conflicts. Al Pacino plays Marvin Schwartz. You guys know how I feel about Mr. Pacino. Action. Chef's kiss in every way, Mr. Pacino. Emil Hirsch plays Jay Sebring, which is crazy. I've literally never seen him in anything except for that early 2000s movie, The Girl Next Door, about the Playboy model. I don't know if you've seen that. It's a weird movie. I watched it on TV when I was way too young to be watching that movie. Yeah, that's the only thing I've ever seen him in. He's good in this though. He plays Jay Sebring, who is a real life person. Kurt Russell plays Randy Miller. He's a stunt coordinator, and he's also the narrator of the film. Zoe Bell, who is in Death Proof, plays Janet Miller, who's the wife of Randy and also a stunt coordinator. We have Mike Moa as Bruce Lee. We have Julia Butters as Trudy Fraser, who's a child actor. We have Damian Lewis as Steve McQueen, and we have Bruce Dern as George Spahn. Initially, Burt Reynolds was actually cast as this role, but he ended up dying before production began. But apparently, when he heard that Brad Pitt had been cast as a stuntman, he came up with the line, "You're kind of pretty for a stuntman," which they eventually used in the film. Bruce Lee says this. So production of the film began in 2018 in LA. Quentin Tarantino said he wanted to do the film from the perspective of himself when he was a child. He grew up in LA and spent a lot of time with his stepfather, going to the movies with him really, really frequently. That's where his love of movies started. So you'll see even the camera angles through the film, especially when driving, are kind of shot at a lower angle. And it's heavily stylized, the way the film is done. The production design is done, and it's very much to mimic kind of like a child's colorful sort of imagination of the world. It's brilliantly executed. I love it. Tarantino's goal was to create 1960s LA with no effects, just using cinematography, costumes, hair, makeup, and production design. However, they did end up using some special effects, but mostly it was in the driving sequences for Brad Pitt because they had to cover up obviously modern buildings and then billboards. So they did end up shooting, there's a scene at the Playboy Mansion, and the scene was actually shot at the real life Playboy Mansion West. At the point in time, Hugh Hefner had died and it had been sold. And so they really had to bargain with the new owner in order to shoot there because the Playboy Mansion has been going through extensive remodeling for a number of years. So the production design had to go in and kind of dress the set of the Playboy Mansion, but it is really shot there. The timeline is inaccurate. However, Hugh Hefner did not buy the Playboy Mansion until 1971. His girlfriend at the time, Barbie Benton, actually found the listing, and they actually had just started dating at the time this film has been taking place, which is late 1968. So the timeline is a little bit off there. The characters that are attending a Playboy Mansion party would not have attended a Playboy Mansion party, at least Playboy Mansion West. At the time, there was a Playboy Mansion, but it was in Chicago, where Hugh Hefner was still living at the time. It's actually pretty cool. I guess they would have shot actually going up the road and going up the driveway to the Playboy Mansion. My favorite podcast talks about this. My favorite podcast is Girls Next Level with Holly Madison and Bridget Marquardt. They were the stars of the Girls Next Door TV series in the 2000s. I don't know if you guys remember that, but that was they were the peak of what I deemed and still do beautiful and inspired to look like and be like. I thought they were so fun and I love their podcast. It's a rewatch podcast. I'm also a subscriber on their Patreon where they do slumber party episodes every week on Thursdays. I look forward to it every week. So Bridget and Holly, if you ever hear this, I love you guys. I've loved you guys for 20 years. You guys have brought so much joy. I love the podcast. It got me through postpartum depression. I swear, every week, something to look forward to, literally kept my brain. So I owe everything to you guys. I love you guys. Anyway, I digress. They said that when they watched the film, they found it almost like deja vu going up to the Playboy Mansion and walking through the whole sequence. So that I thought that was really cool. That two people that lived at the mansion, I think Holly was there for 7 years and Bridget 6. So obviously, like they're experts. Gave that a double thumbs up on accuracy. So I love that. We'd love to see it. Spawn Ranch was a complete recreation as it burned down in the 1970s. And in order to get the Spawn Ranch was a location where 1950s Western shows were shot. To get the look of 60s TV, practical effects were used as well as real life footage and archival footage. They also tried to match locations and sets from real shows and then use the same camera techniques as were used in the 1960s. And then there's some parts where Leonardo DiCaprio was actually inserted into old footage. You can see that in his audition for The Great Escape. So it's kind of interesting. The way that they do this is like it really takes the film to the next level. Like if you're a fan of 1960s and 50s television, like it's really cool to see all of that, like little kind of hidden gems. Even the way they do like movie posters and TV guides and all the stuff that they have for Leonardo DiCaprio is really, really, really cool. I loved it. So because we are talking about real life people, we have to discuss the Manson murders and Sharon Tate. I will only be going over the Tate murders for this portion of the podcast just because you can go there's so much to do with Charles Manson, there's so much theories, there's so much casework, there is so many murders, the family is fascinating. I highly recommend a book called Chaos if you're more interested in the Manson family. It goes into crazy detail. There's also some pretty good A&E documentaries. There's a good BBC one as well. So I'm only going to go over the Tate murders, but I think it's really important to acknowledge that there are many other victims and that this is like not a celebration of Manson because I think they've gotten a lot of publicity. I think it's important to focus on the victims of the murders and making sure that their stories are told. So if you're more interested in finding out more about that, like make sure you do your research. There's lots of information out there about the victims and what happened. So Charles Manson was a cult leader who committed or orchestrated at least 9 murders between 1969 and 1971. Most famously was the Sharon Tate murders and the La Biancas, which were done the following night. He was in and out of the prison system his whole life. He was a struggling musician who eventually befriended the Beach Boys and music producer Terry Melcher, who was the previous occupant of Sharon Tate's home. Manson began his family of runaways and rejects of society, eventually moving to Spawn Ranch in 1968, which was formerly used as a television set for westerns. The women acted as guides for the blind George Spawn and had sex with him in exchange for the use of the place. Manson used LSD along with long lectures of conspiracy theories to control his followers. More persistently was a theory about a race war. Named Helter Skelter after the Beatles song, Manson was a white supremacist, later having a swastika carved into his forehead. Yeah, not a good guy. Not a good guy. Along with murderers, he was extremely racist. He talked a lot about the uprising. He had a lot of fear of the Black Panther movement. Yeah, he's not a good guy. And now to Sharon Tate was an upcoming actress and model. Her notable roles were the TV series The Beverly Hillbillies, Valley of the Dolls, and The Wrecking Crew. She was married to Roman Polanski, who is the director of Rosemary's Baby. He also did The Pianist. This was pre-scandal. Roman Polanski raped a 13-year-old girl and actually is a fugitive in Europe because he will be arrested if he steps in the US. So also a piece of shit guy, but she married him before this happened, so yeah, yuck. And also Hollywood just like lets him ugh. Anyway, she was friends with Bruce Lee in real life. She was a practitioner of Kung Fu, and in order to do some of her stunts in the Wrecking Crew, she had Bruce Lee teach her. There's actually a lot of like barefoot stuff of Sharon Tate in this movie, which apparently is true to who she really was. She often walked around barefoot or would wear like elastics on her ankles, so to give the illusion of shoes. So, I mean, she and Quentin Tarantino would have been like best friends because if you know anything about Quentin Tarantino, the motherfucker loves feet. There's so many shots of feet. Loves feet. So they would have been just buddies. So the reception of her use in the film, Tarantino sent a copy of the script to be read by Polanski's representative, and he had a preview of it. But after the film was released, his wife was quite upset at the likeness being used in the film. Personally, I don't give a single flying fuck what Roman Polanski thinks. So Deborah Tate, Sharon's sister, initially was very upset when she heard about the concept and the production of the film. She's really worried that it's going to be sort of a sensationalized version of the story. She's obviously quite protective of her sister's memory and legacy. So when Quentin Tarantino got word of this, he actually um, reached out to her and spoke to her, gave her a reading of the script. When she read what was happening and how it was going to be done, she completely turned around her opinion. She said, "It isn't what you expect from a Tarantino Manson concept." She showed a lot of praise for the way that Sharon Tate was portrayed in the film. She spoke with Margot Robbie about her and actually gave her some jewelry and perfume of Sharon's for Margot to wear during the production. And they sort of honor Sharon's legacy in the film. Any photos that are used in the film, any movie posters, and any clips of Sharon's movies are all actual clips of Sharon Tate. Margot Robbie is not superimposed on anything. It's all just photos and videos of Sharon Tate herself. Even down to like there's wedding photos in the background in Margot Robbie's or Sharon Tate's house. And those are the actual photos of Sharon Tate. And so now we're going to go into the Tate murders. If you are squeamish, skip forward a couple of minutes. I'll, I'm going to go into the nitty gritty of it because I do think it's important to talk about what actually happened, that these murders were absolutely horrific, and we didn't get this lovely once upon a time in Hollywood ending to this story. So followers Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, Linda Kasabian, and Tex Watson were directed by Manson to destroy everyone at the residence of Cielo Drive and make it as gruesome as they could. Present on the property were Sharon Tate, who was 8.5 months pregnant, Jay Sebring, her former boyfriend, Abigail Folger, and Wojciech Fryoski. William Garrettson, who was the caretaker of the property, and his friend Stephen Parent. Tex Watson shot Stephen Parent 4 times in the chest, killing him outside. Tex Watson then kicked once inside Fryoski and said, "I'm the devil and I'm here to do the devil's business." Tate and Sebring were tied up by their necks together. Sebring protested and then was shot and then stabbed 7 times. Fryoski's hands were tied with a towel, but he managed to get free and then struggled with Susan Atkins and was stabbed in the leg. Tex Watson then caught up with him, stabbed him, and shot him. He received 53 stab wounds. Abigail Folger escaped from her room and Patricia Krenwinkel caught up with her on the front lawn, who began to stab her, and Watson then assisted. She was stabbed a total of 28 times. Sharon Tate begged for her life and that of her unborn child, even offering herself as hostage until her baby was born. Susan Atkins and Tex Watson stabbed her 16 times and then hung her by the neck. She was still alive when she was hung, and her cause of death was hemorrhage. Manson then told them to leave something witchy, and so they wrote "pig" on the front door of Sharon's home in blood. And then the final character that was a real-life counterpart, Bruce Lee. He is shown getting into it with Cliff Booth, the stuntman. Lee's friends and family were very upset by his arrogant portrayal and made accusations of a racism in the way that he's portrayed as well. According to a stuntman, Gene Bell, and a biography that was released in 2018 about Bruce Lee, he did have the habit of kicking the shit out of stuntmen, which is a direct quote. So make of that what you will. His wife also said in a memoir that she wrote, and she was the person who had the main problem with it, that Bruce Lee could have beaten up Muhammad Ali, which is the statement that makes Cliff Booth laugh in the movie. So I think there might be shades of gray on that one. Okay, so we get into the plot. So the film opens up with old clips of a fictional show called Bounty Law. So this takes place in the 1980s, and this stars a character called Jake Cahill. And this is played by Rick Dalton, who's played by Leonardo DiCaprio. So it's a bit of movie inception here. We then cut to an interview with Rick and his stuntman Cliff Booth, and it explains the dynamics between the two. And then we cut to February 8th, 1969. Dalton, the actor, is having a meeting with Marvin Schwartz, who's an agent, and discussing his career. He lies to Marvin Schwartz about who Cliff Booth is, and that his car is in the shop. And so Cliff Booth, his stuntman, is driving him around. In actuality, Rick Dalton has lost his license due to drinking and driving and getting in a bit of a crash. He's quite the problem with alcohol, which ended his show in career bounty law, which he's been trying to like scrape back. And so Marvin Schwartz is played by Al Pacino with perfection as usual. And they discussed the films of Rick's that he likes, including one called The 14 Fists of McCluskey, which is an anti-Nazi film where he burns everybody to a crisp with a flamethrower, which will come up later. So they're discussing his old movie career and discussing sort of what he's doing now. And he's explaining that he has TV spots, often as the villain. And he's explaining this to Marvin Schwartz, and Marvin Schwartz is explaining that this is making him less and less castable because he's starting to be seen as the villain in things. They're not wanting to cast him as a leading man. And Marvin Schwartz says this line: "So, Rick, who's going to kick the shit out of you next week? Mannix? The man from Uncle? The girl from Uncle? How about Batman and Robin? Ping, pow, boom, kaboom, zoom. Down goes you, down goes your career as a leading man." So this sort of sets Rick into a bit of a panic. On the drive back, he's complaining about this, and he breaks down, believing that his career is over and that he's a has-been. And so he's sort of complaining to Cliff Booth, his stuntman. So if Rick's not doing well, how do you think his stuntman feels? Because his career at this point sort of hinges on whether or not Rick is able to get work. So as they're coming home and Cliff's going to drop him off, they pull up and they see Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate pull up to the driveway next to them. And this sort of gives Rick some hope. And he says, "I'm one pool party away from starring in a Polanski movie." So they sort of part ways. Rick goes in to rehearse lines, and we see Cliff jump in Rick's car and into his own sort of rundown one. We see him then drive across town, way out of the Hollywood Hills, to this old sort of rundown trailer. And his trailer is a mess. He's got this pit bull named Brandy, who seems to be remarkably well trained. And then we see sort of the TV guide. We see the decor. It very much looks like 60s stuff. But like highly stylized, almost with like a cartoony flair. I love it. There's these like little wet dog food things that are called Wolf's Tooth, and they have like different flavors. And so I don't know, it's just like fun little details like that, I think, that really elevate this film. So this is where we then cut to Roman Polanski and Sharon going over to the Playboy Mansion. And we're introduced to the characters of Jay Sebring. We see the mamas and the papas, Connie Stevens, Steve McQueen. And as Sharon dances, Steve McQueen is explaining the dynamic between Sharon, Jay, and Roman. It's revealed then that Jay and Sharon used to be a couple, and now Sharon is with Roman, but Jay is kind of waiting in the wings for Roman to make a mistake. So if you've seen that Matt Rife thing about being just friends, I think that's sort of what's happening here. The next morning, we see someone in the Sharon's yard kind of skulking around and claims that he's looking for Terry Melcher, who was the previous occupant of the house. Jay Sebring sort of tells him that he doesn't live here anymore. It's got kind of this kind of eerie feeling. They don't really state his full name or anything, but this is Charles Manson. Cliff then drives Rick to the set of Lancer, which is the TV show he's being a guest star on this week, and basically mentions that if there's any work, to vouch for him. But the stunt coordinator on this is a guy named Randy Miller, and basically they know that that's not going to fly. Then as Cliff gets back to Rick's house and starts working on some of the stuff outside in their antenna, we do a flashback scene to when Cliff was last hired by Randy to stand in for Rick. Rick really had to kind of pull for Cliff, as Randy was really reluctant to, because there's a rumor going around that Cliff actually killed his wife. It's not really confirmed in the movie. You just see another cut to scene where he's fighting with his wife on a boat. Very Natalie Wood, this situation. It's not confirmed in the movie, but there's a book adaptation of this film that Quentin Tarantino wrote, and it is confirmed that he indeed did kill his wife. So once he's hired, he's kind of sitting around and waiting, and there's Bruce Lee. And Bruce Lee is talking to the stuntman and basically bragging and saying that he could beat Muhammad Ali and that his hands are registered weapons and yada yada yada. Finds this very, very funny. And they sort of get into this like challenge where they're going to see if he can beat him. And this is where Bruce Lee says, "Oh, you're kind of pretty for a stuntman." So they get into it. The first round, Cliff lets Bruce Lee win. And the second round, he uses his momentum against him and throws him into a car, leaving a big dent. And this happens to be Randy's wife's car, who, when she discovers this, freaks out and she fires Cliff, and then Randy fires Cliff. And then so it kind of snaps back to Cliff on the roof, just kind of being like, nah, it wouldn't work. And then he looks over and sees Charlie walking away from Sharon's house. We then cut to Sharon, who's running errands. We see her pick up a hitchhiker. She's going shopping for a Roman and a few things. And we see her walk past a movie theater that's showing her film, The Wrecking Crew. And so she goes in and tries to buy a ticket. And she says, she's talking and she explains that she's in the movie and they don't really believe her. And then eventually they do, and she gets her picture taken by the poster. And this is actually a story that happened to Quentin Tarantino when seeing, I believe it was Reservoir Dogs. He had kind of convinced them that no, like I'm the director of this film. So I think that they just try to fit that in. So we then cut to Rick, who's on set, and he is getting fitted by a wardrobe, and they want to make him look nothing like his character, Jake Cahill. They're trying to make him look like a bit like a hippie. He's not really thrilled about this. He's then awaiting his call time and he sits next to his child co-star. She's very funny, very method, only wants to be referred to as her character's name, very trying to stay in character. And Rick's just trying to talk to her like she's a normal little kid, which he doesn't love. And so he's reading a book and then she asks him about it. And he's sort of explaining that it's about a guy who's starting to feel useless in his career, and he sort of breaks down crying. Shooting then begins, and Rick begins to forget his lines due to drinking and like drinking too much last night, and he really embarrasses himself on the set. He then goes back to his trailer and has an absolute meltdown. Now this was entirely ad-libbed. Of course, Quentin Tarantino just kind of gave the direction like, kind of go for it, like whatever you think this would be. And they wanted to kind of mirror the way that like Travis Bickle acts in Taxi Driver a little bit. And this scene is very well executed. He's like throwing stuff around and kicking stuff and telling that saying to himself he's a drunk and he needs to get it together. But then of course he starts drinking, and it's very well done. We then cut to Cliff, who's driving home later, and he picks up a hitchhiker. Who's this beautiful young girl. We've seen her as Cliff has been driving back and forth kind of through the duration of this whole weekend. They've been kind of like making eyes at each other. So when he picks her up, she says that she needs to go to Spawn Ranch, and Cliff, because he used to do obviously TV work out there, says, "Oh, I'll come by. I want to talk to George Spawn, the guy that owns it." So they're chatting, and she sort of tries to repay him with some services, we'll say. And he kind of says, "How old are you?" And she tries to lie to him. And he kind of calls her on being underage. However, he still drops this girl off and is very, like, flirtatious with her. So I'm not going to give him too much credit. When they get to Spawn Ranch, there's an extremely eerie vibe. Very much like, for me, watching Deliverance. Like, just this kind of like, ooh, feeling. The Manson family, there's a lot of sharing. There's a lot of no music in the background, but we hear a lot of barking dogs, a lot of kind of wind blowing through, a lot of tumbleweeds, like a lot of real sounds as opposed to like sort of like a Hollywood movie sound to it. Yeah, excellent, excellent use of like some silence from like the background music. So other members of the Manson family are all kind of watching him through windows or from far away. There's then a character that comes up to him, and this is played like Lena Dunham, and Lena Dunham very much just plays herself. It's so annoying. Anyway, so then Cliff wants to go and speak to George, and they're really discouraging from that, but he goes anyway up to the house. And there's a few of the Manson family members there, including Squeaky, who's played by Dakota Fanning, who doesn't want to let him in at all. And Cliff just sort of muscles his way in and says, I'm going in there whether you like it or not. And then Squeaky says, well, he's not going to be, she's like kind of yelling at him. She's like, well, he's not going to be awake because we just had sex. He's going to be exhausted. So we kind of do this like walk down the hall with Rick, walk down the hall with Cliff, and it's like maybe unclear whether or not this guy's dead or not. And then he ends up waking it up. Turns out George is completely blind. The house is in disarray. It's disgusting. It kind of seems like maybe he's lost some memory. He can't remember who Cliff is, even though they worked together, presumably for a very long time. So I don't know if there's some dementia going on. And Cliff's just trying to find out, is he being taken advantage of? And George Swan says, no, Squeaky loves me. And he's kind of yelling at Cliff and just tells him to get out. So Cliff leaves and then he heads back out of the house down past his car. And one of the family members, Stephen Gorgon, I believe this is supposed to be, or Clem, I don't give the full names, but based on the way that the character looks and then looking at photos of the Manson family, this is sort of who I assume it is, has slashed his tire. Cliff grabs his repair stuff, throws it at Clem and says, fix it. And Clem says, fuck you. And then Cliff beats the shit out of him in front of all the women who try to stop him. And Cliff basically kind of like does one of those little like lunges at them and puts his hand up. And so they all back off, but they send for Tex Watson, who is giving a tour of Swan Ranch up in the hill on horseback. Immediately, the woman that sends for him switches off. She does the tour. And Tex comes riding back, but just as Tex arrives, Cliff has driven off in his car. We cut back to Lancer and we have sort of this extended cut of Rick doing his scene. It's shot exactly like the TV show. So it's point of view from like if you were watching on television as opposed to like watching Rick get filmed. So it's just done and is shot in the sort of like very television fashion, which I thought was cool, added like a little flavor to it. He absolutely crushes the scene, executes it super well. His acting's great. He misses no lines. And he's congratulated by the director and then congratulated by Trudy, who says it's the best acting she's ever seen. And this really touches Rick and he starts to tear up. And I think this is where he starts to kind of believe in himself a little bit. We then jump forward in time, 6 months. Rick did actually go off and do spaghetti westerns after this because he wanted to be the hero again. And he had a bit more belief in himself and sort of saw what Marvin Schwartz said, being like, yes, you need to be the hero. He has gotten married while he's in Italy to an actress from there. He's gained a bunch of weight, and him and Cliff have kind of decided that they're going to part ways professionally, as well as Rick's life is going to change personally because now he's married. So when they get back, they decide they're going to have one last night where they get blind drunk the night before they part ways. And then Francesca, his wife, is kind of sleeping off some jet lag. We then also cut to Sharon, who is heavily pregnant at this time, and she's having friends over. Abigail Folger, Jay Sebring, Wojciech Fryoski. So these are all the real life murder victims, except for the caretaker and his friend. They are not featured in the film, but they were, the victims as well. Cliff then decides that he's going to smoke a cigarette that is dipped in acid, and he begins to have a trip. They hear a loud car outside, and Rick goes out to yell at the occupants of the car. The occupants in the car are Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, Susan Atkins, and Linda Kasabian. And they have been ordered to kill everyone at the Tate house and make it witchy by Manson. So he's screaming at him, calling fucking hippies, saying you're up here to smoke dope, get the fuck out of here, basically. So they go down the hill, and then when they get to the bottom of the hill, they realize that it's Rick Dalton, aka Jake Cahill, and they're like, oh my god, like I just got yelled at by Jake Cahill, that's crazy, because they would have grown up watching this on television. And then there's a new plan that is hatched by Sadie, who's played by Mikey Madison. So shout out to the second week of Mikey Madison. Congratulations on your Oscar, girl. We love you. We love to see your roots. Because of this film, she was cast in Nora with no audition. So way to go, Mikey Madison. And so she starts up and she says, dig this. We grew up watching murders. Every show in the 50s that wasn't I Love Lucy was about murder. I say we kill the people who taught us to kill. We're in fucking Hollywood, man. The people of an entire generation grew up watching kill people live here. And they live in pig shit fucking luxury. I say, fuck them. And so this is the new plan. They're going to go up and they're going to kill Rick Dalton and anybody in that house. So they start to walk up, and Kasabian, as they start to walk up to the house, says she forgot her knife and goes back to the car and then drives off. In real life, she stayed, although she didn't commit the murders. So this is a little bit about Linda Kasabian. So in real life, she actually apologized to the victims during the murders. It was stated by other members of the Manson family during the trial that she stood there absolutely frozen and didn't participate actively in the killing. Although she did the next night go to the murder site with Manson and the other family members, including Leslie Van Houten, who then also went to the La Bianca house. And when questioned about whether and why she went when she knew that the intention was murder the next night, she said that Manson asked her to, and she felt like she couldn't say no. However, she was a chief witness for the prosecution during the trial. She was not prosecuted at all, and she eventually moved out of state, and she died just a couple of years ago. So I'm not sure if this is why she gets a slight redemption arc in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because this is supposed to be more of like, quote unquote, although this film was so fucking violent, a fairy tale ending. I think maybe her redemption is that she just walked away, that she wasn't even there in the first place, as opposed to being sort of a witness to the murders. So the family breaks in. Francesca is asleep. Brandy the pit bull is inside with Cliff, and Rick is outside in the pool. And Cliff asks who they are. I'm just going to give a little bit of dialogue. Cliff says, "Wait a minute. I know you. I know all three of you. Yeah, Spawn Ranch, yeah." And he turns to Katie. "I don't know your name, but I remember that red hair." Turns to Sadie. "And you're Sadie. I remember your white little face." Turns to Tex. "And you were on a horsey. Yeah, you are." And Tex says the line that he said in real life, "I'm the devil and I'm here to do the devil's business." And Cliff says, "Nah, it was dumber than that. Something like Rex." And Sadie says, "God, shoot him, Tex." And Cliff says, "Tex." It's a funny little scene. It's Quentin Tarantino dialogue, so it's very back forth, sharp, pithy. We love it. Cliff realizes what's happening. He goes to Brandy, and this sets Brandy off, and she attacks and rips him to absolute shreds. Cliff then kind of calls her off, and he goes and attacks one of the other girls. Cliff then beats Sadie, or Susan as she's referred to, with a tin of dog food, and she goes running outside and falls into the pool, where Rick then torches her with a flamethrower. Krenwinkel is then killed by having her skull smashed in, but not before she stabs Cliff in the leg. Paramedics then arrive, and Cliff is taken to hospital, where Rick says, I'll visit you tomorrow. And they have a nice little moment. And then Rick is outside in the driveway after he sees him off. And Jay Sebring comes down the driveway. And Jay Sebring says, "Is everybody okay?" And Rick Dalton says, "Well, the fucking hippies aren't. That's for goddamn sure." And they have this little conversation. And then we hear Sharon over the, I don't know if you would call it the intercom, but like the outside where you would press to be let in through the gate. And she invites Rick up for a visit. So this is our fairy tale ending. Sharon's alive and well. The Manson family's dead, and Rick is presumably going to be invited up to Sharon's house, meet Polanski, and then maybe have a revival in his Hollywood career. So that is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, guys. Yeah, I love this film. I love it. It's really fun. If you are a fan of like the changing dynamic in the 1960s and the 70s in Hollywood, and a fan of those era films, as well as like cheesier 50s and 60s television, this is a great film for you. If you are a bit of a true crime buff and you like researching the Manson family, or you have a lot of insight on that, this is a really interesting film. It's great. It's classic Quentin Tarantino. I think it's his absolute best work. So please, please, please check it out. And again, for all my Canadians out there, make sure we are buying Canadian products, not traveling to the US. We are giving an absolute big fuck you to Donald Trump. And remember, we on this podcast support diversity, inclusivity. We support trans people. We support the gay community. We support the disabled, all forms of diversity. And remember to be loving and caring, guys. Happy Thursday. Make sure you get your popcorn and watch this movie.